Hello and welcome to Computer Séance, a podcast featuring spirited discussion about AI and popular culture. I'm Justin.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Tracie.
Each episode, we take a seat at the table to conjure the spirits of AI past, present, and future, trying to find meaning in the technological wonders imagined in popular fictions. Ben, this week you're taking the helm. What do you have in store for us?
So for today, I've selected Wargames, the 1983 film where US high school student, computer games enthusiast, and hacker David, played by Matthew Broderick, starts to play global thermonuclear war. I think it brings up lots of interesting material for today. Before we go any further, spoiler warning, if you haven't seen Wargames, you may want to hit pause and go watch it before continuing on with this episode. In the film, David attempts to hack a computer games company in California to get access to their upcoming titles. But he ends up accidentally hacking into NORAD, the US Strategic Nuclear Command. He accesses a list of games available on their AI supercomputer, the wonderfully named WOPR, or War Operation Planned Response, a machine that continually plays out World War III scenarios as war games in order to learn from them. With the help of his computer programmer friends, David continues the hack by finding a backdoor left by the original programmer, Stephen Falcon, the password being Joshua, the name of his son, who had died in a car crash. And this is the name given to the AI that's embodied within WOPR. David starts playing the game Global Thermonuclear War, selecting from a long list of games that also includes chess and backgammon. WOPR has been plugged into the operational infrastructure of NORAD and the US missile silos, which has been done to automate operations and take the fallible or apparently fallible humans out of the loop. Because of this, the lines between the games that are in the computer simulation and in the war room become blurred, bringing us to the edge of nuclear war. Before we go any further, Tracie and Justin, I just want to turn to you and ask, how did you find watching this film for today?
I was actually surprised by how much of the film that I remembered. I really enjoyed it, actually. Good movie.
I was the opposite. I think I'd forgotten most of this film, but I enjoyed Ali Sheedy specifically. I think I might have a lesbian love affair with her one day.
Somehow I really love her character. I think she just brought just about everything you possibly can to that role.
Including aerobics, which is great.
Including aerobics.
And can you both sum up the film in just one sentence?
The only winning move is not to play.
Ooh, that was a good one, Tracie.
That's a line from the movie.
Mine would be, when in doubt, tic-tac-toe.
So one of the things I was thinking about watching it again was what sort of film it is, because it's quite hard to categorize it. So sometimes it feels like the vibe is like a 1980s high school film sometimes, and then it's also a Cold War thriller.
I think it kind of belongs to me, to this genre that feels very 80s and 90s about game becomes the reality, the deadly game kind of scenario.
Is that science fiction then, or no?
I mean, I think it's a techno thriller in some ways, you know?
I was thinking this film was like Ferris Bueller meets Dr. Strangelove on his day off.
When we were watching this movie, my wife was also really annoyed at what she called a Matthew Broderick trope of the rules don't apply to me, you know, like just performing this kind of screw everybody else. Like, I have knowledge that nobody else has and I can do what I want. And I think to a certain extent, that is an attitude that persists today as well. You know, when we talk about tech bro, that is exactly the type of person we're talking about.
Yeah, to me, it's not science fiction, but it's a adventure dramedy with Ali Sheedy. That's all that matters is Ali Sheedy.
And Ali Sheedy's in Short Circuit.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is quite similar.
Yeah. You can tell that the studios were like, let's make 3 or 4 of these with these key, cute, delicious little nuggets of actors.
But there is this thing about technology putting us into proximity with power in ways that we didn't have before. In the movie Space Camp, you have these kids basically sitting inside a rocket ship, and through technology, they actually have the ability to launch it and wind up in space.
Oh.
It's amazing. It has Val Kilmer in it. But I feel like they're kind of part of the fear we had. Like, even a kid could break into our wargaming technology and mess around with it. Like, there's this fear that kind of goes along with having that proximity, being able to infiltrate power through technology.
That makes me think of the way in which innocence is being exploited here, but also it's a great trope to have these innocent bodies accidentally engage with something that's well beyond them. But actually it's training young kids that you too can change the world, but by going in and playing Thermonuclear War instead of tic-tac-toe.
He's literally teaching people how to hack using a phone line.
Yeah, unlike in Hackers, which you can learn no skills from except for how to make out with everybody.
To begin with, I want to just focus on the initial decision to put WOPR or Joshua in control of the operations of the US nuclear arsenal and to take humans out of the loop, as they say in the film. And I think that's a scenario that really relates strongly to today. So we're going to just begin by kind of running through opening scenes that set up the scenario. This first one, which is the opening scene of the film, which is in and around the US nuclear missile silo and has a lot of foreshadowing in that I think is interesting to pull out. Does someone want to take us through that opening sequence?
You get the sense of like a shift change that might occur at any old job. In come the two new people, out go the two people who've been there for however long. They walk into like a regular looking house in a dusty kind of environment. And then they stand in front of, I think it's a mirror or something like that. And they stand there and hold up their passes. And you realize that that house is the front to like a deep nuclear bunker. So these guys go in, there's running down their protocol. Obviously, they have to have a lot of things done in pairs and agreement. And then I believe they think that they're actually undergoing a real situation. They don't actually know that it's a drill. And when push comes to shove and they're all the way up to the very end, we're just like, one other guy has to turn his key. He just can't do it. There's like 20 million lives hanging in the balance and he can't do it. And I think that's where that scene ends there, right? Before we go back to the bridge.
So there's several bits of foreshadowing, I think, in this sequence. They arrive in a storm. They can't see anything. They can't see the roads. So we have a kind of foreshadowing of the fog of war, and it really expresses the isolation of the decision-making. When they sit down, there's a warning light that comes on their panel, big red light. And they're like, we got a warning. So what is it? Oh, it's just the warhead. The officer says, just give it a tap. And he gives it a tap and the warning light goes off. So you see there just the idea of kind of false signals and needing to interpret this information, not just what it says, which I think obviously comes up a lot later. And then they get interrupted by the radio with the launch order. One of the two men wants to check with a human by getting them on the phone. So we cut from that to a scene in NORAD, which is the North American Aerospace Defense Command. And it turns out the whole thing was an exercise to test the functioning of their procedures. There's people from the government, there's a general, there's a computer scientist guy, McKittrick, who we'll come on to. They're really worried about how to explain to the president that so many of the missile commanders didn't launch their missiles. They didn't follow their orders, essentially. And there's an interesting exchange. The general, who's the sort of top military person there, he proposes better psychological screening. But the computer scientist, McKittrick, says you can't screen out human response. And instead, they should take the humans out of the loop, saying in a nuclear war, we can't afford to have the missiles lying dormant in those silos because those men refuse to turn the keys when the computers tell them to. And we move from that to introducing the WOPR computer, which McKittrick proposes as replacing the kind of human links in the command chain. So I'm going to play you a little clip that follows just after this meeting exchange in NORAD, where McKittrick, the computer scientist, is taking all the others through to see the WOPR computer.
This is Mr. Richter. Paul, would you like to tell these gentlemen about the WOPR?
Well, the WOPR spends all its time thinking about World War III. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, plays an endless series of war games using all available information on the state of the world. The WOPR has already fought World War III as a game, time and time again.
Picking out a few things I think are important. It spends all its time thinking about World War III. It is estimating Soviet responses to US responses to Soviet responses and so on. So it's kind of got a sophistication to how it's playing the game, let's say. And there's a really interesting tension, I think, between McKittrick and the other computer scientist. McKittrick is a bit frustrated with him talking too much about the theory, if you like, and he just wants to kind of get in there and say how practical and useful it's going to be, which I think is a theme that will come up.
Gentlemen, I wouldn't trust this overgrown pile of microchips any further than I could throw it. And I don't know if you want to trust the safety of our country to some silicone diode
General, nobody is talking about entrusting the safety of the nation to a machine, for God's sake. We'll keep control, but we'll keep it here at the top where it belongs.
So the general doesn't trust the machine, obviously, but McKittrick doesn't think he's ceding control to the machine either. So maybe first we'll take the question of humans in and out of the loop as a topic. What do we think about that?
I know that it is, let's say, an argument or a selling point of AI that I hear quite often, that humans are biased. Machines might make decisions in ways that actually help to mitigate some of the biases. I think we need to continue looking at that kind of a topic because machines also introduce other types of biases. But I did think a lot about some recent research that has been about decision support systems and how people relying on decision support systems do start eventually following the judgment of what the machine has advised them. But I think that there's something to be said for having the ability to refuse orders. There have been other moments in history where people working in hierarchical organizations like the military would be refusing to follow orders as a measure of kind of showing that the people have changed. The people don't want whatever the people at the top are trying to lead them toward. And the fact that he finds that a human failing, that this person was thinking and reflecting over the idea of killing 20 million people, that's not a failing. And it just, this whole idea about that, where he says, keep it at the top where it belongs. Actually, that is a fear of, if you keep the humans out of the loop, there's nobody checking on the top.
For some reason, this film makes me think a lot about speech act theory. As a performance studies scholar, I'm pulling this from people like J.L. Austin and Benavist, scholars who thought a lot about the ways in which our language systems can make us do things in the real world. Who will take the command, who will give the command, and what that command will implement once it is enacted or not. And this film is really working on this question of command. This is imperative, this short structure of language to enforce an action. When that action misfires, when the kind of illocutionary act, or what we might say speech act, misfires, what is the effect of that in the material world? Here we have that brought into high relief.
So this is more of a design question, but maybe it kind of relates to what you're saying, like the affordances for thinking and speaking that an act gives. So when they're about to turn the nuclear thing, it's two people turning a key. Like that's a very specific action. It's not just jamming a red button. It's turning something, For me, it seems to indicate that whoever designed that kind of system would actually like a human being to reflect on what they're doing.
It made me also think, of course, about the early fear of LLMs as they became available through OpenAI, the ChatGPT structures that we've all kind of gotten to. The first thing that humans do is to ask it questions about suicide and death, and they want to know the gross stuff. And they also want to be calmed in the fears that this computer won't tell them to kill themselves or enact war. They need to know that there's a failsafe in the command. The first guy points a gun at the other guy because he's not following the command, and that is their job. He's willing to kill his teammate so that the goal of the war game, which is to win, can be played out. There's real effects to the way in which our commands are held up or not.
I think human in the loop is often kind of portrayed as like, oh, don't worry, we've got a human in the loop, or we've still got a human place within what AI is doing in questions of automation in the workplace and so on. I was really reminded of this article I read recently by Cory Doctorow that talks about centaurs and reverse centaurs. A centaur is the idea of a human being assisted by a machine. So the centaur being the kind of mythological animal that's like a humanoid upper body on a horse's lower body. In an AI situation, the human mind is sort of extended through the kind of technological infrastructure. And that's how we're often sold AI. Oh, it'll expand your abilities to do this. But what Doctorow is saying is that the kind of business case for AI is the opposite of that. So he calls it a reverse centaur. So where the humans are serving as appendages to the AI. So rather than kind of AI as an extra layer, double checking the work, that actually makes things more expensive and introduces more processes, even if that makes things better. But the business case for AI is not about making things better. It's about making things cheaper. So actually you end up with kind of many less humans who are in the loop of all these AIs doing lots of work. And then the humans become responsible for checking and for any mistakes that the AIs make. So they take the fall effectively.
So I have this friend who is an editor, and she was telling me recently that she's like, I don't want to just work with AI. That's her main job has now become about checking the edits that AI has done. And for her, that is not why she went into that work. She used to love working with an author to really think about how to bring their work to life, talk about some of the stylistic and personal choices and word use, like really like a wordsmith type of person. And so like there's this idea that in work where we become like a helpmate to AI, we're also being disconnected from other human beings within our job role.
Thinking about the human in the loop, the fear is that there will be no human in the loop, right? And this film reminds us the ways in which humans will be required to always be in the loop, and or as humans will always kind of intervene in any system, whether it's desired or not. I'm also interested in the way in which Cory Doctorow's article does miss out early feminist thinking around sociotech and the cyborg. It might be more useful to think about the ways in which we are always already cyborgic, or if we don't want to use that term anymore, the way in which our socio-technical capacities have grown and the way in which that growth has been mythologized, allowing us to fully understand our engagement with systems of AI.
I don't know if either of you saw Sam Altman's recent comments about how expensive it is to train AI. Did you hear him talking about this? He was saying, I don't think that's fair because think about how much energy it takes to train a human. You've got 20 to 30 years of eating. How like ecologically taxing humanity is. And I don't even know if he sees how perverse that line of thinking is, you know?
Oh, that guy, my God.
And I guess this is the question. Is this entire turn of ever increasing forced engagement with AI systems part of a larger command control? I sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but I actually think this is reasonable strategy. Yeah, to get everybody thinking and doing along the same lines. In addition to the research I mentioned earlier about people kind of trusting decision support algorithms over their own professional judgment. There was this MIT report recently that's been all over the media. And of course, it's a single study. Things need to be repeated. We need to understand exactly how these things are working, but that there could be some cognitive deficits involved in relying a lot on the use of large language models and how we learn and how we engage.
I'm really struck by the Sam Altman quote. Essentially, if machines were doing labor for free, then it sort of becomes a slave labor market, right? And I feel like that's kind of what I get from how Altman's thinking, that we're eating food just to kind of be laborers working for people like him.
There was a comment to those comments that he made that was basically like, he sees us all as like inefficient meat computers. And I thought that is exactly what it sounds like. We talked about this in an episode on the podcast about virtuosity, this idea that the fact that humans are human is a flaw, that they are not perfect is a flaw. And even just going back to Wargames, the idea of mercy being a flaw. Mm-hmm. If you're thinking about this from like a machine perspective. And yes, does every boss, I'm guessing like every master wishes that everybody underneath them would just do exactly as they're told. And every colonel in the army just wants their soldiers to do what they're told. But the fact that we don't do that is actually a very important failsafe, I think, in human society.
So in the film, we have a theme which is around the military, and there's also a theme of learning. And the learning and military themes really come together in games. So games as simulation and models and play. The conjunction of these things has like an interesting history, but it's also something that is really present right now, I think.
One of the clearest but probably oldest examples of this would be in the so-called unmanned aircraft where it's remote controlled. That's back in the early days. It'd be you have somebody in a remote location that's controlling this, and there's something very gamey about this. And already back in those days, people were talking about how that creates a psychological distance between soldiers and whatever their targets are, whatever they're attacking, that kind of removes some personal accountability. And now we have autonomous unmanned aircraft that are flying into places, doing reconnaissance, choosing targets, and executing their strikes on those targets without the involvement of any human. That is an unique development that we're heading into right now. And then you have some of the major heads of the large tech corporations, Dario Amodei from Anthropic. His vision is that the Western nations, like what he's calling like the Western democratic allies, should be working together to share this technology and to build it out so that they can vanquish their enemies. There's online games like that too, where we live in worlds and we work together with people to vanquish our enemies. And now this incredibly powerful technology that is reducing the time frame that it used to take us to think about whether or not and how and where, to just obliterating a large number of targets. And I think that all builds up this narrative of like AI as defense and where now offense is defense, that I think is really dangerous in the current climate. You have countries blowing up entire civilian infrastructure as a defense mechanism. And I wonder if that goes back to this whole distance and removal, that with every step that we're out of that loop, more and more humanity gets lost. And in war, that's a really serious consequence.
I was reading about the use of drones, but also other kinds of robots in the war in Ukraine and the kind of training for the operators. And one of the remarks was being an experienced gamer was better prep and having military experience.
Yeah.
And I think this is quite interesting because there's this intersection with games, which are often, a lot of computer games are around shooting. That's a whole kind of genre.
Yeah.
But I think it blurs a line for me between like soldiering and killing. In the first-person shooter game, the aim is to kill things, whereas soldiering isn't primarily about that, or maybe it hasn't always been about that. You might fire a gun as a soldier to suppress people. You might not aim to hit them, but you deny an area or something like this. And so that sort of feels to me like there's a kind of blurring of, or change of what it means to be in the military to be more like the games that have been built, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing kind of military actions that are much more like murder, right? Or killing. And perhaps the kind of nuclear war theme that's in the film, like, is a version of that. But now, rather than being the kind of one-off fear of World War III, this is now becoming a more everyday kind of activity and more localized.
I mean, we just had the president of the United States recently threaten to wipe an entire civilization off the face of the earth. That's nuts.
It's more than nuts.
And the fact that his press secretary just wiped it away as blustery rhetoric, and the problem is this collapsing between defense and offensive technologies, I think is, this, I learned this term related to drones called loitering munitions. And just that whole term, the idea that it's basically a missile that is already up in the air and sits there waiting to find a target and then strikes it. It's kind of changed the whole temporality of warfare as well. It both speeds things up and extends them longer. When you're fighting trench warfare, how long do these battles go on? People clash, loads of casualties on both sides, and then you need some time to go and recoup and bring your people back to battle. Now it's like this continual loop of highly destructive warfare.
There's also something around the temporal aspects of it. I've heard this horrible phrase, shortening the kill chain, but how AI is being used for target selection for drone strikes or missile strikes and so on, that it can analyze data much more quickly, and it can mean that decisions about attacks can be made much more quickly. And part of how they present that is that, well, the final decision will always be made by humans still. So we have this humans in the loop idea here, which is still the human being placed in a position of responsibility for the failure of AI, right? But also like removing all space for judgment, removing
time for judgment. Because if, as you say, like the Israeli, I think it's called gospel, that basically, it would take a human analyst, let's say, a year to come up with 50 targets. And this is coming up with thousands of targets in a very limited amount of time. What human in the loop can do the appropriate checks and balances there to... I mean, we're already seeing this, war is definitely targeting civilian infrastructure much more, so clearly AI is not capable of making those nuanced decisions. And I think what's worse is that governments don't care.
To bring just the discussion back to games before we move on, games obviously run through all kinds of aspects of computing, right? So we're in, so it's, computer science and games design could be next to each other in a university department and so on. We've seen games like chess as important tests of certain kinds of AI through the decades. Also, we have game theory. So game theory coming from von Neumann, who's a pioneer of the modern computer, let's say, does come into kind of scenario planning and quite explicitly into kind of US nuclear strategy. We see a little bit of that in the film when David's doing the research about Falcon. He discovers an article called Poker and Armageddon, the role of bluffing in a nuclear standoff. So have either of you two come across this games in the context of nuclear war?
No, not me. My relationship to games is in terms of theater games. I come from the performance world. Games can break down and then reinforce social norms, and that's what the tool is for when you're teaching with and through games. Where we see a cognate with war games and theater games, of course, is in the Campesino theater and Theater of the Oppressed style from Boal, etc., where all of the kind of choreographic and strategic structures of games or things you can learn within a game are also a way to kind of push back on cultural repression that's happening within your own systems. So yeah, not in terms of nuclear war, but definitely in terms of the ways in which gaming as a social interactive structure can help thwart the repressive apparatus of the state.
Damn, I'm not even sure how to follow that. That was really brilliant. When I think about like the kind of game theory that you're talking about, the kind that really heavily influenced like the field of behavioral economics, I've got so many criticisms of that kind of way of looking at it. This a very specific idea of rationality is involved in those games, somewhat of a lack of respect for context. And I don't know, I kind of see that mirrored in the way that these kinds of games are envisioned as well, these kinds of war games.
There's a scene that really kind of brings that out, I think, where David has found a computer terminal, is talking to Joshua, and is realizing that Joshua is still playing. And Joshua is still playing because the primary goal, in Joshua's words, has not been achieved. David asks Joshua, what is the primary goal? And the primary goal is, quote, to win the game, right? So Joshua doesn't have the concept of playing for fun, which is a more complex goal.
It's an embodied goal. And I think that's kind of critical, doing something for pleasure, doing something for fun. Yeah. So it makes sense that a machine can't connect with that.
So one of the themes that's in the film is a kind of simulation versus reality binary. For instance, David asks, is this a game or is it real? To Joshua, and Joshua replies, what's the difference?
I should reach DEFCON 1 and launch my missiles in 28 hours. Would you like to see some projected kill ratios?
69% of the housing destroyed. 72 million people dead. Is this a game or is it real?
What's the difference?
Oh, wow.
And just wondering if you have some reactions to that.
When I watched yesterday, I wasn't thinking about the interiority of Joshua / WOPR's kind of experience. I became aware of that kind of misstep of mine. what, if the AI is learning, if Joshua has the capacity to learn, what has he learned in those 10 years potentially of stasis that he is not playing the game with Falcon anymore? And how fast can he learn given this? And I guess one of the questions, is this a version of hyperreality? Does Joshua exist in hyperreality? And what does that mean for us? Hyperreality being a state where the distinction between the real and its representation collapses. NORAD becomes a hyperreal space once the game is in play, but also this interior world that Joshua experiences must be hyperreal.
I was thinking about how Falcon says that Joshua never learned futility, giving up on something. And the fact that it's called Joshua, the fact that Joshua was the name of his son who died in the car accident, this idea of like the machine as the baby of the developer comes up a lot. And therefore also this idea of how you parent your baby machine, how you raise it, the things you teach it, what's important to it or not. This idea of having that responsibility, but then also at some point you no longer have any. And what Falcon is kind of explaining in that scene really reminds me a lot of actually a perspective from the 80s. Michael Crichton had it too, that it's sort of like, oh, well, humans will eventually destroy themselves. They probably deserve it. Let everything take its course, And I think that like when Falcon's sitting there, he's like, I don't know if I should intervene to stop it. And that was an argument back in the day and still is actually about climate change. I feel like the futility issue would not be what I think is the biggest issue in terms of, how to raise your machine baby. It's the fact that machines don't understand any kind of vulnerability. Drones target children and non-combatants, like mercy is a human failing. Like I said earlier, like that comes from somewhere, the environment in which machines are taught to conceive of vulnerability in this way.
Got one more clip to play, which is from the final sequence. And here we have, the scene where Joshua is still playing the game and there's trying to get the codes to launch the nuclear missiles, which is all going to be automated and so on. And Falcon and David together get the idea to get Joshua to play noughts and crosses or tic-tac-toe, to try to gain access to Joshua and also to teach it that it can't win, which is its goal.
Strange game. The only winning move is not to play.
And through that, realizing the only winning move is not to play and deciding not to initiate the attack. So lots to discuss in the scene that I think is about learning with machines. For me, there's something about different types of learning relating to the kind of game simulation. The kind of learning that McKittrick wants Joshua to do is to learn how to be better at nuclear war, measured in amounts of destruction and so on. And Falcon says that there are people like McKittrick who think you can win this. Whereas what Joshua manages to learn at the end, they learn something that's of a different type. So they learn something that's a constraint of the game they've been learning to play better. And I think that's a really interesting kind of juxtaposition, the different kinds of learning that Joshua does, the different kind of learning that Falcon wants Joshua to do versus McKittrick, and taking that to today's AI and so on. Like, I think everyone's under pressure in the workplace and in everyday life and so on to learn how to use AI that's given to us. Whereas one of the things we need to learn is more about what it's like, what its constraints are, what it does.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And it would be easy to miss it out by concentrating on what the McKittricks around us want us to do.
For me, I thought that like the realities that they all inhabit are kind of based around what they're perceiving as relevant. And in the process of learning, they're expanding that horizon of what's relevant to consider. McKittrick isn't considering when he's suggesting that the machine run everything, that a scenario such as this could happen. Joshua isn't considering the idea that there are some games you cannot win. Falcon is not considering a lot of things, his own personal accountability and responsibility for having created this thing, which he might have done so to examine these loftier questions that he has in mind for himself. But should he have considered the practical application of the things that he built? Maybe. It's just a matter of your process of learning is your horizon being opened up to you about what things matter in the context.
Do you want to share a final thought on what to take away from watching the film in relationship to today?
I'm really struck by how even in this early framing of AI and in relation to our globalized world, we're hyper aware of the human capacity for pain and pleasure and knowledge. And that seems to be stripped out once we've mechanized or automated learning and knowledge systems, and how much time it would take to bring that type of embodied affective relationship to knowledge into these other systems. So yeah, just really thinking and reflecting on the deep time of learning.
Maybe in a similar vein, thinking about how much like human experience and maybe even human biases in a positive sense, how things like human interactive emotions and attitudes such as mercy and compassion, and these are all also sort of embodied parts of our learning and relating to the world, and things that machines can't understand, or at least don't understand at the moment. And so I'm very dubious about the application of AI in any kind of military setting. I don't think it should be done. I don't think war should be optimized, made more efficient. Yeah, none of that.
Okay, so Tracie, Justin, thank you both so much for your thoughts, and thank you to everyone for joining us to listen to this podcast. It's been a pleasure thinking about Wargames with you. For more detail and references for our discussion in this episode, please do check out the show notes. And if you enjoyed the episode, please do subscribe or text it to a friend.
You can follow us on Instagram at computerseance.podcast. That's at computerseance.podcast. We want to hear your thoughts. The more people we get into the conversation, the smarter, and honestly, the more fun it gets. Will you read Ali Sheedy again?
Thank you for listening.
Could you do this in the voice of Joshua, please?
Thank you for listening.
Good.
Thank you for listening.
That was beautiful.